Hey everyone, it's Robert Evans, and we are about to jump into another episode of The Power of Simple. And today we're going to do rule of thirds. And if you hang out till the end of the show, you're going to see one of my celebrity portraits. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Pixel Show. And today we're going to do one of my favorite topics, the power of simple. Before we do that, really quickly, if this is the first time you're watching this show, go back. You can watch some of our previous episodes of Power of Simple. You can see me use lenses, and I don't necessarily do reviews, but I use them and I show you what you can use them for and how I use them. If you really want to learn more about us, go back and watch the bio show. And there's so many other things. So thanks for being here, and let's go. So the power of simple. What I'm teaching you is just simple techniques that help you make your work more powerful. So on the power of simple, there's a lot of topics that we cover. And I'm teaching you composition, but there are a few other things like colors, not really considered composition, but rule of thirds, but cropping isn't. Each episode, I pick a different topic of the power of simple and help you hone in on those things that will make your work more powerful. So today's show is on rule of thirds. So basically not centering things, right? So rule of thirds, the rule of thirds is the rule of thumb or a guideline which applies to the process of composing visual images and designs such as film, paintings, and of course, photographs. In these series, I show you 6 images. So we're going to start. These are all my images. This very first image is a wedding image. I'm a wedding photographer. That's mostly what I'm known for. But this is one of my favorite, I would say, I guess, recessional images. I did a wedding probably 2-3 summers ago on Ellis Island in New York. And it was beautiful, of course, amazing as you can imagine. And I really loved how the planner designed the wedding with the element with all clear. It was a Jewish wedding, so they had a chuppah, the chairs were clear. But if you see in the background, the chuppah or the altar was clear because they didn't want to block the view of Lower Manhattan. And so when I saw that, I thought to myself, well, I have to make sure that I also get Lower Manhattan in the background. So one of the things that I did is I chose a wide lens to make sure that when my couple walked down the aisle, I could see everything, including them. And then I put them to one side. So hence rule of thirds. They are on the right side of the frame. And I just backed down the aisle with them and shot as we walked down the aisle, making sure that I included Lower Manhattan in it, right? So that's kind of the story behind the image. So let's look at some of the elements. So we've already established that we have rule of thirds. We also have middle ground, foreground, background, right? The couple's kind of the foreground, the audience is middle, and of course, Lower Manhattan is in the background. So that's another element of Power of Simple, and we'll do whole shows on that. You have patterns, lines, and space. You have the patterns made up of the people in the audience, of course, the pattern and the lines of the city in the background. And even if you think about it, the aisle runner, it's a nice line leading you in and out of the image. And then we have perspective, right? So there's a nice perspective of them being in the foreground. And if you think about perspective, even when you learn to draw, and I can't draw worth a hoot, as they say. But when you learn to draw perspective, because I did take a drafting class in college, all the lines and the points in there lead to the same point. So I guess in this case, everything would be like leading towards the rabbi. The lines of the aisle kind of lead towards the back. The horizon lines lead towards the rabbi. So you kind of have that perspective. It's a nice almost triangle, if you will. Okay, let's go on to the next image. Also taken in New York, on a different day. This was a wedding that I did at the Gramercy Park Hotel, and this is in the penthouse of the hotel. It was a very small, intimate wedding. And of course, as I always do, I'm always looking for something different or unique. And I saw the reflection and I saw the doorway. So I just asked my bride, she kind of didn't even know what I was doing, asked her to kind of lean into the doorway there and look at her flowers, smell her flowers. And I just started taking pictures, and she kind of was looking at me like, what am I doing? Because I was a little bit away from her, and I had my back to her, actually, and so she kind of couldn't figure out what I was doing. But, of course, she loved this image. All right, so let's look at this one. So we have the rule of thirds. She's on again. She's on the right side of the frame. She's kind of centered in it, I would guess. But then you also have the framing of the index finger and the thumb of the man in the painting on the other side as well. It's a reflection. So whenever you can incorporate a reflection into your work, it makes it a little bit more interesting. Sometimes, of course, we go for the obvious, a mirror or off of water. Those typically are the things where I'm looking for reflections. But in this case, just the lighting was just right, and I saw this, and I wanted to do this. And then, of course, I made it black and white because it was artistic. I thought it looked way better in black and white. It just didn't do justice in color. So sometimes making your images black and white also help make them simple, because I think a lot of times when you're looking at a color image, you kind of get caught up in looking at the colors. Whereas when you're looking at a black and white image, I think you're more focused on the image and the emotion and the mood, etc. Here's an engagement shot that I did in Los Angeles. So this was done at Union Station in downtown LA. We had been walking around and shooting. It's a beautiful building. If you're in Los Angeles, you've never shot there, don't tell them I sent you, but it's a great place to shoot. And they're actually pretty okay with you shooting there. But I wanted something that was a little bit different. So there's this long hallway that leads to all the different tracks. And so I wanted movement. I knew I wanted motion blur in my image. So what I did is I sat them on one side of the hallway and I sat on the other. And I told them, just kiss and enjoy each other. And I clicked off images as people went by. So I really like this one. Let's look at it because yes, I have rule of thirds. Again, they're almost center, but they're not quite in the center. And then I have my leading lines. I have the horizontal lines or the horizon lines in the image kind of leading to them. And then of course the bike, which is a round line, creates the motion because the wheel's spinning. I did a little bit of a shutter drag. Like a 15th of a second is always a good place to start for motion. I didn't have a tripod, but I just placed the camera on the ground and it pushed the shutter. And then you kind of have the frame within a frame because of the wheel. Now they're not quite centered in the wheel, but I really think it worked. It's moving just enough. It doesn't detract from their faces too much. But this is probably one of my all-time, it's up there in my top 10 of my favorite engagement images. Now this is an image that I did in Minnesota. You can imagine it was someplace cold. And so this is a place that they build every year in Minnesota, and it's called ice castles, and it typically moves around. And they build it, this happened to be in a park, but they build probably, I would guess it's probably 5 to 10 acres of ice castle carvings, things like this. And this was the entrance. And I was doing kind of a fashion shoot for editorial images for a bridal salon in Minneapolis. And so I had 2 or 3 models in different dresses. And I know all you're going to say, like, oh my gosh, those poor models. Well, it was actually warm that day, warm from Minnesota. It was about 30, 35 degrees. So yes, the girls covered up in between shots, but they were fine for the few minutes or so that we would do and we'd shoot. But the interesting thing is, one of the things that I like to say is, if you have intent, like I knew I wanted to shoot here because I wanted to use a wide lens, because I wanted to show the sky. It was a beautiful day too. And I chose this spot and I thought about it. And right about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as we were finishing this, they open up the place to the public. And this woman walked in with this black Scotty dog and a red leash. It's hard for you to see in this image, but it was a bright red leash. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I just said to the lady, can I use your dog for a second? And she's like, okay. And so I gave the model the dog and we shot this image. We have a little bit of depth of field here. Not too much, but she's in the foreground and the ice is a little bit softer. I used, I believe, like a 16 to 35 to shoot this. We do have patterns, lines, and space because the ice makes vertical lines all the way throughout the image, the icicles. And then we also have her in the lower third. So again, she's not centered. She's not even in the center of the frame. She's in the right side of the frame, and then she's in the lower third of the frame. So I never like to center things unless the shot calls for it. So I always try to avoid centering my subjects in images unless that's what I'm going after. So every once in a while to center your subject is okay if that's what you want. So this image I shot down in Antigua in Guatemala. This was probably done 5 or 6 years ago. I was shooting with a good photographer friend of mine, Carlos Baez, who I actually featured in a previous episode of I Wish I Took That. So if you want to go back and see some of Carlos's work, you can go back and look at I Wish I Took That. So we were going around Antigua. We were shooting this bride, and it was Carlos's wedding. I was kind of helping second shooting with him, but I saw this beautiful black door, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to shoot in front of that. So I said, Carlos, do you care if I do a shot? And he's like, no, go ahead. And so this is what I did. I had her walk in front of the door. Again, I wanted motion blur. I think I put my camera on a car from across the street, and I had her walk in front of this door to create sort of this mood. Let's take a look at it. So I have rule of thirds right now. She's in the left side of the frame. And I wanted motion blur, so that's another element. And again, if you go back and look at the previous episode of Power of Simple, you can find an episode on motion blur. And then I do have patterns, lines, and space. The dots on the door, of course, create lines and a pattern. And then there's also vertical lines in the door that lead you to her as well. So if you're always looking for those things, trying to figure out how you can make the image more interesting. But again, think about this. If I had her, and if I caught this of her right smack dab in the middle of the frame, it wouldn't be as powerful because she's walking into the shot. She's walking into the negative space. So you want to think about how to use the negative space in your images when you're composing. Okay, so this is a fun one. This is a celebrity portrait that I did. When my studio was in Southern California, I did a lot of, well, not just big celebrity weddings, but I did a lot of like celebrity portraits. I worked for a local like newspaper, the Encino Sun, the Sherman Oaks Sun, and they would let me do all their cover stories about the celebrity stuff because, of course, a lot of celebrities lived in the San Fernando Valley, Encino, Sherman Oaks, Tarzana, Calabasas, all those areas. And so I'd get to go out and do these fun stories. And the best thing about this is they never told me what they wanted to do. They allowed me the freedom to do what I want. I would kind of know what the piece or the story was about. And then they let me go in and do what I want. This was one of my favorite ones. This guy's a great actor. If you don't know who this is Fred Willard. He's been in a ton of movies, a character actor. He's been in a lot of stuff. You recognize his face. This has, of course, depth of field because I'm focused right here on his eyes. And I used the portrait that was hanging on the wall in his house of him sort of as my background. We were just kind of playing around and he had that, I saw the magnifying glass on his table and I said, oh, hold it up to your eyes. I mean, you guys know as photographers, sometimes like, you know, you make it up as you go. I certainly do. And it just worked. It was just a really fun shot. So again, I made sure that I put him in the lower thirds of the frame just by necessity because I needed to shoot it vertical so that I could show the painting or the portrait of him and the dogs in the background. And then the other thing we have is middle ground, foreground, background. You know, he's the foreground. Really, the eyeglass could be the foreground. He's the middle ground and the painting's the background. So always another element of Power of Simple that you can try to find. So that was it. It was fun. So I want you to think about those things when you're composing and you're out there shooting. Think about your composition. Slow down a little bit. Look for the rule of thirds. Look for the depth of field. Look for the patterns and lines in space. Keep your background simple. That will make your images the most powerful. One last thing. I showed you these images in the intro, and you may have noticed this shot, but I didn't explain it. So what this is, and I just tell you a little story about it, is also Power of Simple, and it's a little bonus rule of thirds. This was a project that I did many summers ago, probably 6 or 7 summers ago now. But the idea of this was I wanted to go out and I wanted to photograph a bride and groom in front of a tornado. And part of that process, Wedding Channel helped us get a couple. We ran a contest. And then this couple went out on the road with us for like a week. I hired a storm chaser to help us find tornadoes. But in certain cities, we had time where we had to like set up for the night and wait for the next day for the next potential storm. So this was in a place called Gurley, Nebraska. And there was a farm kind of down the street, and we'd gone across the street and shot on the farm. As the day ended, the storm rolled in. And so we ran across the street to this field, and the lightning was off in the background. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to get a lightning picture. So again, I talked a little bit about intent earlier, but I had the intentions. I really wanted this photo. Now I got 1 or 2 images that day of lightning strikes hitting the ground because it was a pretty active lightning storm. But this image, to get the purple sky, to get the lightning going horizontally across the sky, I mean, I didn't do anything to this image other than take out a farm light in the background, and that was about it. But the colors are the way that they were. And how I got this, I was on a tripod, of course. I stood away from it so I didn't get hit by lightning. But I would do long exposures and 5, 6, 7 seconds, but I'd pop a flash in the beginning of it. So I'd pop the flash, which will freeze your subjects, and then do a long exposure, and then hope that I got a bolt of lightning. But as you can see, it worked out. But I just wanted to share that little story with you so you knew how I got that. So thank you for watching The Pixel Show. This was an episode of Power of Simple Rule of Thirds. And just recapping the 6 images that I showed you. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. If this is your first time here, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends. And we will put up more episodes of this and all the other things that we do. But once again, I'm Robert Evans. I'm your host of The Pixel Show, and thank you for being here.